Hey, Jeff Rick here, coming to you from the future. I'm finalizing the edits on this latest episode on exponential curves and the fact that we have a supercomputer in our pocket and trying to visualize or create some comparisons of things that are easier to grok so that we can really understand what's happening here. And as I'm going through it, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of math. But ultimately, I just wanted to get to some things that we can kind of grasp or visualize to try to quantify better how much technology has changed. And what's important is really the concept of how much it's going to change in the future. So you'll hear a lot of numbers. Try not to get too wrapped up in the numbers. I'll put all the math in the notes so you can go and run your own numbers. But the concepts to really focus on, we've gone from a Cray supercomputer in 1973 to our mobile phones. And our mobile phones are thousands, if not tens of thousands of times more powerful for fractions of the cost, fractions of the weight, fractions of the energy consumption. So if you think about where we were in 1973 and where we are today, and now you start to think about where are we going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now on these exponential curves, it really begs the question, what will we be carrying around in our pockets or in our brains or in our heads or however we're going to be connected to this technology down the road? ChatGPT came onto the scene 2 Novembers ago. They're already talking about ChatGPT, I think it's 5, that's coming out soon, is 100 times more powerful. So that's 2 years, 100 times, so 10x twice to get here. So the most important part of this episode is trying to visualize how fast this stuff is moving and try to think about where it's going to be going. We didn't even get into some of the interesting things that Ray Kurzweil talks about, like mortality, escape velocity, digital twins when applied to biology and people. I'll put a bunch of his links in the notes below as well, so you can watch some of his interviews and videos, because it's a really interesting concept. And I think it's important that we always kind of think of where we are today as kind of where it's going to end. And it's not at all. You look back in any technology and just a few years back, what we were doing seems almost juvenile sometimes. And then you think about the implications in something like medical technology, where, artificial knees now are an outpatient procedure. Artificial hips are practically an outpatient procedure. Stents and pacemakers and all these things that we kind of take for granted were amazing technological developments in the not too distant past. So what does the future hold? So keep that in mind as we go through some of the numbers and some of the illustrations. Don't get hung up on the math. Run the math yourself. Try to think of some interesting ways to compare what the power of computing was 50 years ago compared to what the power of computing is today, and try to think about what is it going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, a very different future. So with that, I'll send you back to the past where we recorded this episode, which I've been trying to get out for so long. So I'm just going to hit publish, tribute to my buddy Keith Townsend, and get it out there. Hopefully you enjoy it. Don't get too hung up in the numbers and the math. Really try to focus on the illustrations, and if you got better ones, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Rick here, coming to you from the home studio for another episode of Turn the Lens. I'm going solo today. I've got Ray Kurzweil here in kind of virtual spirit, virtual sense, but he's not here in person, unfortunately. But he recently came out with his latest book called The Singularity is Nearer, and it's pretty wild, and he's out doing a book tour. I had the good fortune of seeing him here at one of our local bookstores. If you get the chance, I would strongly suggest you do. He does another great interview where he talks about a lot of the concepts. If you don't have the chance to see him, I'll put a link to that in the description below. But this whole concept of exponential curves is really hard for us as humans to grok. And I know I've mentioned it before, but I thought, let's go through some specifics and really see if we can give you some tools to see, to make it more tangible, I guess, digestible, recognizable of what exactly is going on here. So Ray always shows this graph showing the scale and the power of computation over time. Looks like from 1935 to the present day. And it's up and to the right. You say, wow, it looks like a pretty steady curve. And the reason it doesn't really express the exponentialness clearly is because it's performance over price. So this continues to grow at a rapid rate. And if you look to the left and you see the scale, you go from 0.00000001, it's like 5 zeros and a 1 as a fraction, to the top, which is not thousands, not millions, not billions, but trillions. So you go from, a decimal place with 6 places to a trillion at the top. So how do you even start to understand that? What I wanted to do is just make a real simple compare against a couple of devices that most of us have probably heard of if we're not very familiar with them. And that is the Cray supercomputer, which came out in the late 70s, and a modern smartphone, like my S24. So we'll go through some of the basic computing measurement parameters, try to convert it into something that's easier to grasp, and really use that to try to illustrate how far things have gone, how far things have come since the late 70s, which seems like a long time ago, 50 some odd years ago, thereabouts, but it's really not that long. And what's important is that the time going forward, we're only on a steeper part of the curve. So let's go through some of these things. So first off, let's talk about computing horsepower. And that is measured in something called flops, which is floating point operations per second, which is doing the math. The computer's doing the math. And a Cray in the late 70s, a Cray 1, and I'll put all these numbers in the notes below, could do 160 megaflops. A modern smartphone does 5 teraflops. And a teraflop is 1,000,000 megaflops. So you go from 160 mega to 5 teraflops. So how much more is that? And it's more. It's 31,000 times more. 31,000 times more between a Cray supercomputer 1 and your phone. So again, it's just like hard to even understand what that means. So what I decided to do is let's look at that in terms of how long would it take to compute all the credit card transactions that happen in the world today. So right now, according to ChatGPT, there's about 1.98, close to 2 billion credit card transactions that happen around the globe every day. So let's just call it 2 billion in round numbers. So at 160 megaflops, it would take approximately 3.5 hours to process all those transactions. So basically think old school batch processing, all the credit cards run all day long. You want to run it through the machine so that you can put all the money where it's supposed to go. That would take about 3 hours and 26 minutes with the state-of-the-art machine in the late 70s. Using your modern smartphone at 5 teraflops, that same calculation would take, how long do you think? Again, the comp is 3 hours and 26 minutes. Modern smartphone, it would take 0.39 seconds, less than half a second to do the equivalent work. From 3.5 hours to less than half a second. That's how much smarter your smartphone is than the state-of-the-art computing not that long ago. So that's flops as a proxy for computing power. Let's look at working area, or RAM. In RAM, I always like to think of as kind of the tabletop of your computer. How much stuff can you have open at one time? How much things can it be working on? And the old Cray had 4 megs of RAM, 4 megs. Your modern smartphone, and again, these are top-end smartphone, can have 12 to 16 gigs. So let's just go with 16 gigs. So how much bigger is 16 gigs than 4 megs? Well, it's 4,000 times. 4,000 times. So if we think about that in terms of workspace, let's just say your modern desk, and I just went and looked at a catalog for a modern standing desk. At 72 inches by 30 inches is about 15 square feet of working area, which is a pretty good sized desk. So if that represented 4 megs, how much desk space would you need to represent 16 gigs? So compared to one desk on a Cray, how much desk space is that equivalent to in your modern smartphone at 16 gigs? And it's basically a football field. It's like 6,000 square feet compared to 15 square feet. Or excuse me, 60,000 square feet compared to 15 square feet. So it's basically comparing a desk and working area to a football field, including the end zones, which come in at about 60,000 square feet. Huge increase, 4,000 times. Okay, let's talk about storage. Now, it turns out that Cray didn't actually have internal storage. They used attached storage. But according to Wikipedia, generally it would be between 80 megs and 250 megs. So we're going to use 250 megs, the high end, and compare that to your modern smartphone, which has 1 terabyte. So how do we think about that in terms of something that we can visualize? Because the raw number, it's 4,000 times, which is hard to grok, something 4,000 times bigger. So I thought, okay, well, let's think of it in terms of documents and storage space. So it figures out that two drawer file cabinet, which is, I have lots in my garage still. We used to have them at the office all the time. So just a standard 2 drawer file cabinet. At a calculation of 50 kilobits per page in a PDF can hold about 5,000 pages. So let's just call it 5,000 pages for quick and dirty math. And that's about a foot of shelf space. Times that by 4,000, okay, that's about 4,400 feet of bookshelf space, or 0.85 miles, almost a mile. So instead of a foot worth of bookshelf space, you now have a mile of bookshelf space. That's the difference between how much can be stored on a 250 meg drive compared to a 1 terabyte drive. Okay, so stay with me. Let's talk about the power consumption. The Cray supercomputer used 115 kilowatts. 115 kilowatts. So as a comparison, the average home in the U.S. today uses about 30 kilowatts per day. 30 kilowatts per day. So it's 4 times more than you use in your home. Modern smartphone, it says, according to ChatGPT, when it's doing typical tasks, it uses between 2 and 4 watts, not 115 kilowatts, 2 and 4 watts. And when it's working hard, it could spike to 8 to 12 watts. So it's literally 0.000008 times more efficient to do, remember, 4,000 more times more power. These are just crazy numbers, and really hard to kind of get your hands around, get your head around. But then here's the kicker on top of it all. The Cray in 1977 cost $7.9 million. So that's approximately $40 million in today's money. $40 million. $40 million. What do you pay for your smartphone? For a nice top end Samsung or Apple, $1,000, $1,200, maybe $1,500. It's crazy for doing 4,000 times more work than what would cost $40 million based on where the Cray was years ago. So $1,000 versus $40 million for 4,000 times the computational power than what you had there. And then just the last little piece that we measure in computing is bandwidth. And so back in the day, in the late 70s, state-of-the-art was what was called a T1, which was about 1.4 megs, which all my friends in the business say was the best performance on its best day. Compared to today, most of the phones today are all 5G. And 5G has a range, but most of the top-end ones, and again, we've been talking about the top-end phones, can do 10 gigabits per second. So how do you compare the bandwidth, the throughput of 1.4 megs to 10 gigs in 5G? And the comparison, I really struggled with ChatGPT to find a good comp. So finally I got to the point where I said, if a garden hose at 5/8 inches, 40 PSI at a typical house puts out about 17 gallons per minute. So if that represented a T1 state-of-the-art back in the late 70s, what type of hoses would you need to represent the throughput of 5G? I tried to find like a single big giant hose, like a construction, not like a construction hose, but like a construction pipe, struggled with lots of things. So finally we got to, okay, what if we compare it to fire hoses? So fire hose is about 2.5 inches in diameter, and those go at about 100 PSI. And so a fire hose at 2.5 inches and 100 PSI puts out 250 gallons per minute. So we're comparing, so that's 250. The garden hose has 17. To get it up to the size of a 5G, it's 6,000 times more. 6,000 times more. So it would take 440 fire hoses to be 5G compared to one garden hose for a T1. That is so much more throughput. And then again, here's the kicker. It's all divided by price. Back in the 70s would cost you about $1,500 a month. Today, if you account for inflation, that $1,500 a month turns into about $7,800 a month. So imagine if your phone bill just for your connectivity was $7,800 a month for only 1/6,000th of the throughput. So again, I had kind of ChatGPT help me write like a little summary document. It's crazy. So comparing your modern smartphone to a Cray supercomputer, you get about 4,000 times the working area in terms of the RAM. You get 31,000 times more horsepower in terms of the flops. You get 4,000 times more storage using 0.00001 the power. And it costs you for the unit $1,000 compared to 40 million. And for your monthly service fee, call it $100 compared to close to 8,000 for the Cray. So I don't know if that helps illustrate what's happening. And again, as I've said many, many times, today's the slowest day of technological change in your life. I think the ChatGPT event 2 years ago, 2 Novembers ago, was really kind of exponential curves thrown in our face, that we can now, via our phone and 5G, talk to a supercomputer that lives in the cloud, that understands natural language better than they ever have, and will talk back to you and answer in a human voice and give you the information. And it's only getting faster and faster every day. So I hope this was helpful. I don't know if it's helpful. I struggle with this. I think humans' ability to grok exponential curves is a big part of the challenge that we have in technology. As I've talked about in other videos, there's kind of human biology development, evolution, which is pretty slow. There's been civilizations evolution over the last, many thousands of years, which has also been relatively slow. It wasn't that long ago that you probably, presumed in your career that you would have the same career that your folks had, which was the same that their folks had, which was the same that their folks had, which was farming for most people not that many generations ago. And you would presume your kids would do the same. That's not the case. But even civilization's change speed is nothing compared to the exponential speed that we're seeing in computing. And again, another really illustrative story is the tale of of the kid and the chess and the grain of rice. It's an old fable where some kid beat the king in chess, and the king said, how can I pay you back? And he said, I just want 1 grain of rice on the for the first day of your payback, which is on the first square of the chessboard. The second day, I want you to double it, so 2 grains of rice. Third day, double it. 4 grains of rice. Fourth day, double it. 8 grains of rice. For the 64 days, for the 64 squares on a chessboard. And if you do the math, and there's a lot of great videos out there talking about it, by the time you get to the 64th day, you basically would be covering the entire country of India deep in grains of rice. There's not that much rice. So exponential curves grow fast, and that's just doubling. That's not timing it by 10. So it's a tough thing to grok, and it's a good thing to think about. Hopefully this is interesting. Maybe it's not interesting. I'll throw some visuals up. Even the visuals, trying to get ChatGPT to help me to do the visuals, to do the comparison between one garden hose flow versus however many fire hoses I said. It can't do it. To have a mile's worth of file cabinets or bookshelf space. These are really difficult concepts to grasp, and we're not really built for it, which is why there's so many advances in technology on so many fronts, and they just sometimes are surprising how fast they move. And as I've always said too, you only know about the technological advances in the industries in which you play, but it's happening across all industries concurrently, and you just don't see it all the time because it's not stuff that you're that aware of. So interesting times ahead. Today's the slowest day of technological change for the rest of our lives. It's only going to get faster. Hope this was helpful. Hope it was entertaining. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. As Keith Townsend said one time when we were together, he had a post that he struggled with trying to get it down. I've struggled with this. I've struggled with trying to get the concepts together that are illustrative, but I don't want to miss the window and not get the post up, which is something Keith and I talked about, which is the worst of all worlds. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it helped. I think it's interesting. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube. Thanks for listening on the podcast. Appreciate you being there, and reach out, say hi. Signing off from the home studio, Jeff Frick. See you next time. Take care.